10 years before I saw the light of morning, a comradeship of heroes was laid. From every corner of the world came sailing the 5th International Brigade. They came to stand beside the Spanish people to try and stem the rising fascist tide. Franco's allies were the powerful and wealthy. Frank Ryan's men came from the other side. Even the olives were bleeding as the battle for Madrid it thundered on. Truth and love against the force of evil, brotherhood against the fascist clan. Viva la Quinta Brigada, the pastor and the pledge that made them fight. Adelante is the cry around the hillside. Let us all remember them tonight. Bob Hilliard was a Church of Ireland pastor. From Killarney across the Pyrenees he came. From Derry came a brave young Christian brother. Side by side they fought and died in Spain. Tommy Woods, age 17, died in Cordoba. With the Fianna he learned to hold his gun. From Dublin to the Via del Grio, where he fought and died beneath the blazing sun. Viva la Quinta Brigada, the passer and the pledge that made them fight. Adelante is the cry around the hillside. Let us all remember them tonight. Many Irishmen heard the call of Franco, joined Hitler and Mussolini too. Propaganda from the pulpit and newspapers helped O'Duffy to enlist his crew. The word came from Maynooth, support the Nazi. The men of cloth failed again, but when the bishops blessed the blue shirts in Dunleary, as they sailed beneath the swastika to Spain. Viva la Quinta Brigada, the passer and the pledge that made them fight. Adelante is the cry around the hillside. Let us all remember them tonight. This song is a tribute to Frank Ryan, Kit Conway and Dinny Cody too, Peter Daly, Charlie Reagan and Hugh Bonner. Though many died, I can but name a few. Danny Boyle, Blazer Brown and Charlie Donnelly, Liam Thomason and Jim Straney from the Falls, Jack Nalty, Tommy Patton and Frank Conroy, Jim Foley, Tony Fox and Dick O'Neill. Viva la Quinta Brigada, the passer and the pledge that made them fight. Adelante is the cry around the hillside. Let us all remember them tonight. Viva la Quinta Brigada, viva la Quinta Brigada.
We're joined on the line today by Diarmuid Breathnach. Dermot, welcome to Near FM, or Fáilte Near FM.
Yes.
Dermot, perhaps the major reason to be looking to speak with you today is we're coming up to the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Guernica, or Guernica. There's a lot of people out there, Dermot, would only know Guernica through the painting. How significant do you think that the painting is in keeping those historic memories alive?
I think it's very significant because it reached audiences that the Spanish state would have wanted not to be reached, and also in their time the German authorities would have wanted not to be reached. So in that sense, it was very significant. It's also significant in that it's now allowed in Spain, in the Spanish state, where it was banned for many years under Franco. And again, it's significant in that although, in a sense, it belongs to the Basques, it wasn't done by a Basque, but it was, a tragedy suffered by Basques. It sits in a museum in Madrid, and they won't allow it to go to the Basque country. So I think the painting is very significant for all those reasons. And, of course, your pronunciation first was correct. It is Guernica, and the pronunciation Guernica is a Spanishization of it.
Okay, well, I'm quite happy to be corrected on that one, Dermot. But, Dermot, let's start at the beginning. I mean, I don't think you were around when the Spanish Civil War ended in 1939. I wasn't either. But it seemed to be something that the two events that I can recall, Hungary in 1956, I was 6 years of age at the time, but I can also remember, I think about 1959, one of our school friends went to Spain at the time, and they came back with stories of pillboxes and gun emplacements and things like that. And that brought to me that there was a war there, and it was a war in a foreign country that we didn't know a great deal about. What's your first recollection in that regard, Dermot?
Well, I suppose my mother was born in the Basque country, so it's always been an element in the house.
Okay.
She wasn't a Basque speaker and probably didn't consider herself Basque, but she considered it part of her background. And I suppose that it's always been around in the house. We knew, and also because I come from a Republican family,
sure.
So I wouldn't call myself an Irish Republican. I'd be for, independence and all that, but I wouldn't belong to one of those groups. But because of that as well, I suppose we had an affinity with the Basque aspirations as well.
Oh, absolutely. I don't want to pry too much here, Dermot, but would your mother have been considered a refugee from that conflict, or did she come to Ireland for entirely different reasons? And as I say, I've no need to pry on the personal.
No, not at all, no problem. No, she came to, excuse me, she came to Ireland because I'd already been born, and my father, who was Irish, wanted me to be raised in Ireland, wanted to raise a family there, and he managed to persuade her to come, and so she came. But she came from a Spanish-German family with Basque background as well, and they would have probably have been on a different side of the Civil War than the one I would sympathise with.
Yeah. On that basis, Dermot, just listening to you there, did you consider yourself growing up of what we would call one of the speckled people? And I'm referring here to the Hugo Hamilton novel.
I know. Actually, he went to the same school I went to.
Well, yeah.
Guernica. I'm not sure. I had to fight in the street on my way to school because of an Irish speaker.
Mm-hmm.
I was called Spanish onions in the Irish school. So I never really knew what it was, I think, until I went to England and spent some years there, and they made me a paddy, and so I'm Irish.
Yeah. No. As I say, it's just when you mentioned the fact that you had a German family there, that it brought the book back to me, and it's not so much about whether we're Spanish or Basque or Germans. There was a discourse of difference there, where people like me, they made us feel different because we had red hair, or you wrote with your left left hand or something like that.
Yeah, sure.
Two of my recollections, and this is why I just want to see, particularly now that we see you've got a personal association, my recollection never was that this was there was anything Catholic about this particular conflict. Almost all the combatants, with the exception of perhaps those coming from Russia, and were largely the combatants were Catholic. Did you ever see that it was anything other than shall we say, an internal struggle before you started to look at the history of it, Dermot, or was that being told in your own home?
I can't remember now. When you grow up with something, it's hard to remember back exactly what you were told and what you learned from other sources. But I would say that you're right, it was not about Catholicism, but Franco used Catholicism. In fact, a lot of Basque priests who were nationalists were shot. And, those nationalist troops and their Moorish allies raped loads of women. Mm-hmm. So you can't say that that's a Catholic act or a Christian act of any sort. No, the combatants on both sides were mostly Christian, and certainly the Basques up to then had been a very traditionally Catholic society.
You know, the reason why I raised that one, Dermot, is because one of our neighbours at the end of the road was a gentleman called Michael O'Riordan. And, yes, and Michael, he was a legend in the area as having been part of the International Brigade. So in the part of the world where I grew up, what we always thought was an ideological war in that sense. And rightly or wrongly, I always came to associate if you like, the what emerged as the victorious party, the nationalist side. I always equated Catholicism and fascism as two halves of their two heads of the same coin as a result of the Spanish Civil War, and I'm quite happy to be corrected on that one. But that was the abiding memory that came across to me as a kid. Was that ever there in your childhood, Dermot, or was that perhaps a position you might have even come to later in life?
Well, my father was my father, when he went to Spain first, was probably quite a Catholic nationalist type of person, and he actually admired the regime there from what propaganda he'd read. Yeah.
What period did he go there, Dermot?
He went there just after the war.
So he would have been there in the 40s or thereabouts?
He would have been there around 46.
Okay, yep.
But he very, very quickly changed his mind, seeing what it was like there. And my impression, my understanding of things from years later is that Catholicism and the Church, as in this country, were control mechanisms. Mm-hmm. There were mechanisms for social control, and they had nothing really to do with religion as such. In such that, although yes, in Spain, in many parts of Spain, the church was associated with fascism, in the Basque country it was not.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because what we tended to get in the Spanish Civil War, we got all the great dictators coming together. You had Salazar in Portugal, you had Mussolini in Italy, that fella in Germany, and at the time Franco was probably the least of them. And I know that is all relative. But
I couldn't say he was the least of them.
Just at that particular time.
In body count, certainly not.
Yeah.
Much more than Salazar.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no, I mean, he eventually, as I say, he caught up. But when the Spanish Civil War broke out, he wasn't even in Spain.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
And he was just a general at the time. He was, in fact, a military mutiny against the elected government.
Yeah. What's your understanding? Because it's got lost in the mists of time to a certain degree, and particularly as the Francoists had 30 or 40 years to not only cleanse the memory, but to also rewrite the history books. There was a popularly elected government, a left-wing government in Spain. What's your understanding of why it came to conflict?
Well, as I said, the military rose against it, and backed by a certain number of industrialists, just as in Germany. The fascists came to power, the Nazis came to power backed by certain industrialists. But also in Spain, I think the the landowners, it was still quite a backward country socially in many ways, and the landowners had a lot of power. And so they formed part, if you like, of a triad of forces in the Spanish state, mobilized the church behind them, but in other parts the church would have been against them. Certainly in the Basque country they would have been against them.
Yep.
And they overthrew the government. I mean, there'd been a lot of kind of talk about, the country's going to the dogs and morals are going, you know, women are getting uppity and all those kind of things.
The old standard fascist playbook, as we like to call it. Yeah.
And we've heard a fair amount of it here over the years as well.
How important then, Dermot? Because, I mean, Franco seemed to try to be pitching himself for what we would call representing the national interest or central government. How important was regions at that particular point in time?
It was important in the sense that it was a threat. The Spanish state had a completely hegemonic attitude, very much like the French state, actually. The integrity of the state was considered paramount, and even after the death of Franco and what some people would say were attempts to democratize the nation, and what others would say was just a paper exercise, a veneer, if you like, because all the underlying structures were left there, all the important personages, and some would say criminals of the Franco era were still left there. But the Constitution says that the state may not be broken up, and that in fact the army is the guarantor of that. So when some years back the Basque National Party, which is quite a conservative Catholic party, maybe a bit like Fianna Fáil in its kind of nationalistic and other elements, but they proposed to hold a referendum in which the two questions would be, do you approve of ETA, and do you want independence? Now, what they hoped was that people would vote no to ETA and yes to independence. But the Spanish state told them, you can have the vote on ETA, but you can't have the vote on independence.
Okay. Yeah. But something, and this is why I was interested in that, Dermot, is that, yes, we've got politics and we've got a certain degree of militarism within the regions, but when I've been to Catalonia and from talking to people who've got a Basque background, culture seems to be incredibly important within that, and the politics to me is often only there to guarantee the cultural rights rather than the culture is there to guarantee the political rights. What's your take on that? I mean, particularly growing up with a Basque-born parent, was that something that came across to you growing up in that environment, Dermot?
I remember my mother telling me that her grandmother, who was not from the Basque country but had married a Basque, saying to her, referring to her and to her people, she called them Guk. Guk is a Euskara word which means you. In other words, you lot. Mm-hmm. So she had already very clearly identified herself with Basque culture and spoke Basque as well. But my mother didn't, and her mother didn't either. So that to me is an expression of the power of the culture. And but I think there are economic reasons as well. The Basque country has been very economically successful, as has Catalonia as well. Mm-hmm. And if Catalonia and the Basque country secede from the Spanish state, it won't be just a question of losing territory. It'll be their only two economically successful areas.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, the Basque, everyone looks at the Basque history and tradition. I mean, their maritime industry alone was, hugely significant for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Yeah. But moving from that, Dermot, I mean, the Basque, what we would call the Basque country, it's not a simple grouping in the sense of Leinster. It's made up of several provinces, and it also straddles the French-Spanish border as well. How homogenous is the Basque, if you like, culture and region in itself?
I think it is very hegemonistic in the sense that the Basque language is and has been making great strides through all the regions, but less so maybe on the French side of the border, especially down near the coast. And that's because that area has been used, like around Biarritz, and that has been used a lot for holiday homes, and has huge influx of people from outside. And also, there is no viable industry, hardly any viable industry there, and no university either. So it's constantly being bled, and that's not replaced. But by and large, the feeling that they're Basque is very strong. Now there is a bit of a conflict between Navarra and the rest, because some people, a lot of Navarra took the side of Franco during the Spanish Civil War, and there are those who say that Navarra is different, and then most of the Basques would say no, it's not. But in fact, Navarra is our capital. So it has that kind of complicated thing, and the Navarrese regional government has been very right wing and very discriminatory against the Basque language.
Sure. Apologies, sorry, Dermot.
No, sure.
The reason why I asked that is because it has been put to me is that there, if you like, there was almost an internal civil war within the Basque country itself during the Spanish Civil War, that they were lining up on different sides, so on and so forth.
Yeah, it was a strange thing. In the past, there had been a nationalist movement in the Basque country that was associated with a king called Carlos, and they became called Carlists. And in fact, they wanted him to be king of Spain, a bit like the kind of stuff that happened between Scotland and England, where at times, the pretender for the crown could have been seen as the national king of another part, and unfortunately, they took the side of Franco and eliminated most of the opposition. When the Phalangists didn't need to bump off anybody when they got into Navarra, because it had already been done for them. That's a tragic part of history. Now, later on, there was a progressive strand among the Carlists who were actually wanting to have an independent Basque country. And in the 80s, there was a big massacre of them, organised by the Spanish state, with ministers involved and police involved, both in plain clothes and out of plain clothes. And that put an end to that branch of the Carlist movement. So now I suppose it's between the Basque Nationalist Party are very, very weak in Navarra. So you have the Izquierda Abertzale, which is the left nationalists, if you like, or the pro-independence left, and they are coming up as the force now there, and they've already come up as the dominant force in many other parts of the Basque country.
Sure. Let's look at the Spanish Civil War itself. I mean, the area that the Basque region is in, or the Basque country is in, it seemed to be largely under the control of the nationalists, or the Francoists. Is that a reasonable reading of it, Dermot? And the if you like, the Republican side pretty much had the west coast, the east coast and the central area. Clearly that changed, but was that the initial configuration?
Yes, because the Republican government very belatedly offered the Basques autonomy, and two of the southern Basque provinces came in with them, and Navarre didn't. Now, of course, that was not completely 100% uniform, but as you say, that region, the centre, the east coast, and the border area, apart from Navarra, were signed up to the Republic, if you like, because the Basque leader, got them over there on the point that they would be given autonomy, which is what they wanted then.
So, on that basis, then, I mean, what was the significance of Guernica? My understanding, again, is that this was, while it wasn't a huge town, it was important in terms of government, that was where regional government met. Is that because it wasn't a military town in itself?
No, it was not a military target in any sense. There were no anti-aircraft guns or anything there. it was. It had the kind of significance that maybe Tara would have to us.
Mm-hmm.
It was the place where Basque kings had sworn to uphold the rights of the Basque nobles, I suppose you could call them, although it wasn't a feudal system really. And that had been sworn under the Tree of Guernica, so that was very significant in that sense. But it wasn't the only place. They also bombed Durango, another town, and they bombed Santander as well, which is just across the border in a very Spanish part of the state. But Guernica was significant in that sense, and also it was a market day, so they could maximize the civilian casualties.
There is dispute, and I don't want to say it anymore as to whether there was a market on that day, but I will leave it for others to go and check that because, in essence, that's probably the least significant issue in itself. The other side of the coin, Guernica was. It was, to me, it was also the road to Bilbao, and Bilbao was the major metropolis in that area.
Oh, it was, sure. And Santander could also have said to be on the road into the Basque country.
Yep.
So, yes, but that still didn't make any sense from a military point of view. You would just bring your army through. You would bomb, maybe when your army is on the way in, you would bomb the opposition lined up against them. But that wasn't the case. You know, I think it was part of terror, but also a practice run for the Luftwaffe.
Indeed. Well, that's the other interesting point in the sense that the Spanish didn't really get involved in the aerial bombardment. It was largely Germans and Italians, or German and Italian fascists. How did they get to be there in the first place? Because that's if you go back to my point of equating fascism and Catholicism, I mean, these were coming in operating against what was a legitimate and popularly elected government.
Indeed, they were, yes. But there was a kind of a deal between the Italian fascists and the church. And, of course, Germany was mostly a Protestant country, so that wasn't the case. And, in fact, some of the opposition to Nazism came from Catholic priests in Germany. But no, I think it was quite clearly on Italy's side. It was almost official lending of soldiers and air force. Lots of soldiers arrived there, thinking they were on their way to Abyssinia or Ethiopia, as it is now. And that's been recorded. On the German side, I think it was an unofficial lending. You know, in the same way that you might turn up in a country as a military advisor, say, or an arms expert or something else, but really be on loan from another country, or even directing forces from another country. And I think in Germany's case, it was, you know, the Luftwaffe was lent, part of the Luftwaffe was lent to them, given a different name, and they went off to try their blitzkrieg tactics.
Yeah. So, something that perhaps younger listeners might not appreciate, in the sense that if you had Spain and Portugal, you essentially had a fascist Iberia. You then were getting the Vichy lot in France, so that would have taken down that coastline. If you had Italy, then you virtually had a fascist Mediterranean. That's right. That must have been a wonderful dream for those who didn't know what history was going to tell them 5 or 6 years later, or 10 years later.
Well, I'm sure it was, yeah. And Hitler tried to get Franco to join him officially, but Franco stayed out. He played his cards more cleverly. Unfortunately, the Western powers, well, France, before it was invaded, Britain, other powers actually stood by and in some ways helped the fascists because they blockaded help from coming into the Republican government. They even blockaded their own citizens going to fight in the brigades. So that was the situation. They, in a way, they they created the monster or helped the monster to grow that later on turned on them.
Yeah, because once it got to a certain point, and I think particularly with Guernica, people saw that this was not just a domestic, for want of a better term. Do we know who the major arms suppliers were, particularly to the nationalist side? We can assume that the Soviets gave some to the Republican side, but was it all fascist powers that gave it to the Francoists?
I haven't looked into that. You might like to ask some of our speakers, Harry or Enda that.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand that certainly in the planes were supplied by Germany and Italy, who supplied them with pilots as well.
I was going to say pilots as well. It wasn't just the weaponry.
And soldiers on the ground were Italian, as well as armoured cars and artillery and so on. But how much arms arrived in crates, sent for them to use, for the nationalists to use, I'm not sure.
Let's look at the event itself. I mean, it was. My understanding was that the first bombs went in at about 4:00 in the afternoon. Whether there was a marker there or not, there was still. It was a town, 5,000-6,000 people. It's easy to look back and think that wasn't compared to what we've seen in Baghdad and places like that, but it was the equivalent of shock and awe of its day, was it not, Dermot?
It was, of course, yes, and that was. I suppose if you're going to try an exercise out, you might want to try it out on a smaller target first.
Yeah.
Later on, they were going to hit big industrial cities with big populations. This was low risk because there were no anti-aircraft guns, and they could see the effects of the bombing. They could see the effects of destruction. They could see how the fire spread. It was, like an experiment in a laboratory.
Indeed. Now, some of the commentaries I've read, particularly about the German side, the Luftwaffe side, there seemed to be difference of opinion in the sense of whether the shock and awe would have its impact to the degree of so devastate people's psyche that they would just roll over, or there was also a view that it could have the opposite effect in the sense that it would harden resistance. It seems in the initial phase, Dermot, and I would be again happy to be corrected on this, that it did actually work in the sense that people were just so shocked by the level of devastation and the level of ferocity. This hadn't been something that was seen before, that it did work and that they rolled through. Is that an accurate interpretation?
Well, I can't say, because they didn't use it in order to then put troops through Guernica. They used it, as I said, as an experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, when they did bomb, they still met resistance, and people still did fight them from in Bilbao and from inside Barcelona as well.
Yes, but from a propaganda perspective, this was only a small town. They must have publicised it fairly widely as to actually what was done there, and I'm talking about the nationalist side.
Well, no, actually, that's the thing. They did, but they wouldn't. They originally spread propaganda that the Basques had set fire to their own churches, and had done it themselves. So they were trying to cover up their responsibility. And in fact, it was a London Times correspondent called Steer, who was there at the time and went and picked up fragments of German bombs with the industrial marking still on them. That was one of the factors in turning the story around and making it clear. But even for decades afterwards, they were still denying they'd done it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, clearly, some people didn't believe them because Picasso was moved to produce what I would still say is the most famous painting of the 20th century. He didn't do that on a whim. No, of course not. Picasso was already political, and
was going to be, I'm not sure he was actually out of Spain at the Spanish state at the time, but he was going to be out anyway. He was not going to be hanging around under a government run by Franco.
Yes. Again, my understanding as well is he refused to allow it to be shown in Spain during Franco's lifetime. That's fairly strong commitment.
Yeah, sure. He was a radical. I'm not sure, exactly what politics he had, but certainly he was anti-fascist and he was a radical.
Yes, if I've read it correctly, that it was shown at the Republican Pavilion of a World exhibition, but it was never given access to by the Spanish government. The painting itself now, unfortunately, belongs rightly in the Basque country, but it's not. Where is it now, Dermot? Do you know?
It's in the Prado Museum. Which is a high prestige place for it, but the Basques say it's their tragedy and it should be in their country.
Yes, well, there's an excellent Guggenheim in Bilbao. I'm sure they would find a place for it.
Oh, I'm sure they would.
Yeah. What do you think is the legacy of Guernica in the Basque Country? Because there's certainly, if you go to Barcelona, there's clearly a legacy of the Civil War in the Catalan region. Did it intensify after the end of hostilities? Because once, if you like, by 1939, Franco was well entrenched in power.
Yeah, there were many consequences. I already spoke about the repression of the language and the flag and any kind of symbolism. But he also installed military governors in the Basque Country, which ran all the areas. Massive, in the first days of takeover, massive firing squad executions. Then later on, huge numbers put in concentration camps, some of whom died, some of whom survived. There were also many people that left the Basque Country. Many of the nationalists had left and had gone to France or Mexico or the United States, where the government in exile was for a while. And Franco brought in people from other parts of the Spanish state to settle those areas, a bit like the planting.
Sure, but yeah, that immediately brought it to mind, the Elizabethan plantations.
So that was part of, and then of course, over the years, both the resistance and the Basques have, since the time of Franco, from the beginning almost, used strike as a weapon of resistance, which has happened in a few countries, but not in most. And so that was, I think, within a very few years of the end of the Civil War, there'd already been a massive strike, and there were other strikes and demonstrations, and then movements grew, and they started having secret schools to teach the Basque language. They're called Ikastola. And in time then, the Basque Nationalist Party youth wing, along with a few other groups, split away, influenced by Cuba and Algeria, by what was happening there, and by the youth and student movement across, and formed a group called ETA, which was not a military organization for nearly 10 years, but was subjected to massive repression and torture, and then they became a military organization. So
sure.
Those are some of the outcomes, I suppose.
So would you characterize current, what I would call Basque national aspirations and cultural aspirations as being an evolution from that, or would you still say there's an element of fighting the Civil War? Has the new generation come? Is this a new generation with a new explanation, as we say, to use a cliche, or are they still fighting some of the struggles or some of the injustices of their grandparents?
I'd say it's both. I'd say it's a fusion of both. Most pro-independence Basques that I meet now on the left are not religious, and some of them are very anti-religious.
Indeed.
Their parents might go to church, but they don't. Some of the parents as well are not going to church now as well. So there's that, which is different. And also they aspired to socialism, which their grandparents wouldn't have necessarily.
In fact, some of them may have been quite anti.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the question of Basque nationalism, the question of the language, are still very, very important to them. They want a united country and they want independence.
When you talk about a united country, does that mean including the French provinces as well? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a saying, Saspiak Bat, which is the 7 or 1.
How do the French respond to that? Because generally speaking, you often hear that any of the repression is on the Spanish side, but I also gather that there's quite a bit, shall we say, of surveillance, for want of a better term, on the French side.
There is, and there's also arrests of people who the Spanish state want. Very little proper procedure on investigating warrants. It's more or less guaranteed the Spanish state asks for someone, they're going to hand him over or hand her over. Also, they don't even recognize the Basque language. They don't recognize the Breton language or the Catalan language either, and those are all minorities within their state. In a sense, French national hegemony is even stronger than the Spanish state. For instance, the Spanish, after Franco, at least granted the Basques regional autonomy. It's true they split it into two regions, but at least they've given that. In the French, on the French side, they won't do that with the Basques. In fact, that's one of the demands of the Basques there. What they do is they subsume them into a department, which includes areas which are not Basque, in order to, I suppose, make it that much harder for a kind of a national interest to grow there.
But yet they're very happy to have Basque people training out for their football teams on a very regular basis.
And so are the Spanish.
Yeah. Last but by no means least, Dermot, because is there... I mean, in many respects, the political landscape of Europe has changed dramatically since that period. Even, in the last 30 or 40 years, it's changed. Does Basque nationalism hold any faith for some form of recognition within Europe, or is it still seen as this has got to be something that has to be granted by the central government in Madrid?
Oh, I don't know. That's a difficult question to say. I think the Basques, if you ask them, would say, well, we want a different kind of Europe anyway. Certainly those on the left would say.
Sure.
Some people may actually, you will remember that years ago, it used to be said that nationalism was dead. And since then, events, some of them very tragic, especially in East Europe, have given the lie to that.
And to say nothing of the Balkans.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It could mean the breakup of Europe. Some people would be horrified by that, but that would not necessarily be a bad thing.
Yes. The other side, then, and just to conclude, Dermot, there was a lot of, I think it was 600 Irish people went to the Spanish Civil War as well. I mean, and they went on both sides. How important do you think that was for formulating, if you like, Irish body politic? Because the state was only, 15, 20 years old at the time. I mean, it seems to me that on both sides that there is a legacy that came back and that is there in Irish politics now.
Well, I think the ones who went to fight for Franco were essentially recruited through the Blue Shirts, which formed part of the Fine Gael party. And their time there was very... shall we say, didn't crown them with any glory.
No, they tend to be less respected in this part of the world, or less remembered.
Not just that. The only military engagement they were in, they ended up shooting their own side, the Spanish fascists. So some people think it would have been good to leave them out there longer, but they got shipped home in ignominy. Yeah. Whereas the Irish who went out there, many of them from the Republican movement, but not all, such as Mick Reardon, for instance.
Yeah, quite a few were communists.
Yeah, that's right, and socialists. But generally covered themselves in glory and gave many martyrs to the cause. There's a plaque outside Liberty Hall with some of their names there, and they're remembered in Viva la Quince Brigada, which Christy Moore sings as well. But I would say most Irish people, from my experience, sympathise with the Basques. They don't sympathise with Franco.
Yes. Well, as I said at the very beginning, Dermot, the painting is there as a symbol. There's an enormous story of people's lives and people's aspirations encapsulated in that. But in the meantime, we're just delighted to be able to share the 75th anniversary with you today, Diarmuid Breathnach. Dermot, take care, and we will talk to you again soon. Got a
all victims of oppression, for the tyrants fear your might. Don't cling so hard to your possessions, for you have nothing if you have no rights. Let racist ignorance be ended, for respect makes the empires fall. Freedom is merely privilege extended, unless enjoyed by one and all. So my brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. Let no one build walls to divide us, walls of hatred nor walls of stone. Come greet the dawn and stand beside us. We'll live together or we'll die alone. In our world poisoned by exploitation, those who have taken, they must give